Hi guys, so today we went over a lesson on simplifying radicals. So what radicals is we are really just going to look at this sign. This is called a radical, okay, but that's also called a square root. So those terms are interchangeable, so we can use them both, but they mean the same thing, okay? So the basis of radicals is we are trying to simplify this number in here. Now, when we're working with a few of these, sometimes we're going to notice that those aren't perfect squares, okay? And what perfect squares are numbers that you could take the square root of and will give you a whole number. So perfect squares include 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, 36, 49, 64, 81, 100, 121, 144. So those are the ones that we're really going to focus on, okay? So those are perfect squares. So this is something that you should write down in your notebook, okay? Because we're going to use these. So when we are trying to simplify radicals, what we're trying to do is find two different numbers that multiply to get you 75. But what we really want to do is get a perfect square. So one of those numbers we really want to be a perfect square, okay? So in this first example, for example 75, what we need to do is we need to find two numbers that multiply to 75, okay? But we really want one of them to be a perfect square. So in this case, what I really want you to look for is in a few different cases, there's going to be two perfect squares. So one of them could be 4 and 18 or 4 and 16, but you always want to choose the highest perfect square, okay? But in this case, I'm going to use 25 and 3, okay? Because 25 times 3 gives me 75, and I know that 25 is a perfect square, okay? So step 1 is doing that. Step 2 is then breaking it down. So the square root of 25 times the square root of 3. So I just broke it down into two different square roots, okay? And my last step is just to get the answer. So the square root of 25 is 5, and then there is not a square root of 3, so that's the most simplified form. So you're just going to write that next. And your answer will be 5 times the square root of 3. And that's how you simplify a radical, okay? So when we look at number 2, the square root of 16, that is a perfect square, and I know that the square root of 16 is just 4, okay? I'm then going to move on to number 3, and I see that it's the square root, or radical 36. I see that's a perfect square, so I just know it's 6. Okay, number 8 is the same thing. 64 is a square root, and I know that's 8. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and go on to number 5, and I'm going to do number 6 with you, and we'll talk about more. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and find two terms. Okay, so I have radical 80. This is not a perfect square, so I need to break it up. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and find two numbers that multiply up to give me 80, but I really want one of those to be a perfect square. Okay. So I'm looking, I know that 80 is divisible by 4, okay? And that's a perfect square. So I could use that. But I also want to see if it's divisible by anything else. In my head, or on a calculator, I also know that 16, you could divide, or 16 is also, 18 is also, so I'm sorry, 80 is also divisible by 16, okay? 16 is bigger than 4, so I'm going to use 16, okay? And I know that 16 times 5 gives me 80. All right? So then I'm going to go ahead and break it down again. Now that I've done step 1, I'm going to go ahead and break them down. So square root of 16 times the square root of 5. Okay? And I know that the square root of 16 is 4, and I know that I cannot break down 5 anymore, so I'm just going to put the square root of 5 right next to it. And this will become your answer. Okay? Then I'm going to go ahead and look at number 6. So I'm looking at 30, okay? Now, in my head, I know that factors of 30 are 1 and 30, but I'm going to look at my perfect squares and say 30 and 30 is not a perfect square. Now, you do have 1, but I really don't want you to focus on the number 1 because the square root of 1 is just 1, so it's really not going to make that big of a difference, okay? I also know that factors of 30 are 2 and 15, but I could see that those are not perfect squares. Then I could say 3 and 10. Neither of those are perfect squares. And then I could say 5 and 6, but neither of those are perfect squares either. So because I don't have anything that's perfect squared, the answer just stays the square root of 30 because it can't be simplified any more than that. All right, so that for that case, that would stay 30. I'm gonna do number 7 with you, and then I'm gonna ask you to pause and go ahead and do 8 through 20 on your own for homework, okay? So, I'm breaking down the square root of 8. What 2 factors? 1 and 8, okay? I know 8's not a square root, so I don't wanna use that. And then 2 and 4. Now, 4 is a square root, so I'm gonna go ahead and use that as one of my factors. My next step, so that's step 1. Step 2 is then to break it down. So square root of 2 times the square root of 4. And I know that the square root of 4 is 2, and I could just leave the square root of 2 next to that. And that would be my answer. Okay? So go ahead and do the rest. So you have 18 through 20. And I just want you to do that same thing. Now, make sure you have those perfect squares down. That's super important. So if you did not write these down yet, you should go ahead and do so. Okay? All right, see you later.